Behind the golden gates of Astoria Palace, where cameras never reach and servants whisper in shadows, a storm has been brewing for months. What the public sees as royal elegance masks a family torn apart by jealousy, tradition, and a secret that could destroy the monarchy forever. Today, that storm finally breaks, and when it does, even the most loyal guards will be forced to choose sides. The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls of Astoria Palace like a shroud of secrets waiting to be unveiled. Princess Elena Valentina stood at the towering window of the East Wing, her delicate fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass as she watched the palace guards change their shift below. At 28, she possessed the kind of natural grace that made photographers weep and the public adore her. But behind her emerald eyes lay a weariness that no amount of royal training could hide. Elena had always known this day would come. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of the royal family for the past year had reached a boiling point, and she could feel it in every whispered conversation, every sideways glance, and every forced smile at public appearances. The source of this brewing storm was not some political scandal or international crisis, but something far more personal and devastating. The truth about her marriage to Prince Alexander, the heir to the throne. 6 months ago, Elena had discovered that her husband of 3 years had been conducting a secret affair with Lady Victoria Pemberton, a member of the royal court and someone Elena had considered a close friend. The betrayal had shattered her world, but what made it worse was the palace's response. Instead of addressing Alexander's infidelity, the royal advisors and Queen Isabel herself had pressured Elena to maintain the facade of a perfect marriage for the sake of the monarchy's reputation. The crown comes before personal feelings. Queen Isabel had told her during one particularly brutal private meeting, "Your duty is to the people of Astoria, not to your wounded pride." But Elena was no longer the naive young woman who had married into the royal family with stars in her eyes. She had grown stronger, more determined, and far less willing to sacrifice her dignity for the sake of appearances. This morning, she had made a decision that would change everything. The sound of hurried footsteps in the corridor outside her chambers made Elena turn from the window. She recognized the distinctive click of her personal assistant Margaret's heels on the marble floor, accompanied by what sounded like several other people. Elena's heart began to race as she realized that the moment she had been both dreading and anticipating was finally here. Margaret burst through the doors without the usual formal announcement, her normally composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. Behind her stood 3 members of the royal guard, their faces grave and their hands resting on their ceremonial swords. The lead guard, Captain James Morrison, had served the royal family for over 15 years and had always shown Elena nothing but respect and loyalty. "Your Highness," Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly, "Queen Isabel requests your immediate presence in the throne room. She's quite upset about something." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had expected this confrontation, but the presence of the guard suggested that things were even worse than she had imagined. "What exactly has happened, Margaret?" Captain Morrison stepped forward, his weathered face showing genuine concern. "Your Highness, with respect, I believe it would be best if you came with us immediately. The Queen is—" He paused, choosing his words carefully, "in a state I have rarely witnessed in my years of service." Elena nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. She had known that her decision to speak with that journalist yesterday would have consequences, but she had hoped for more time to prepare. The interview, in which she had hinted at serious problems within the royal marriage without explicitly naming Alexander's infidelity, had apparently reached Queen Isabel's ears faster than expected. As they walked through the ornate corridors of the palace, Elena noticed something unusual. More guards than normal were stationed at every doorway, and the usual bustle of palace staff was noticeably absent. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if the very walls of the ancient building were holding their breath in anticipation of what was to come. The throne room doors, massive oak panels carved with the royal coat of arms, stood closed before them. Elena could hear raised voices coming from within, one of which she recognized as Queen Isabel's, though she had never heard the older woman speak with such venom before. Captain Morrison exchanged glances with his fellow guards before nodding to Elena. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "whatever happens in there, please remember that not everyone in this palace shares the same opinions about what is best for the royal family." Before Elena could ask what he meant by that cryptic statement, the doors swung open, and she was ushered into the grand chamber that had hosted centuries of royal ceremonies, celebrations, and confrontations. What she saw inside made her blood run cold. Queen Isabel stood in the center of the room, her usually impeccable composure completely shattered. Her silver hair, normally arranged in an elegant updo, hung partially loose around her shoulders. Her face was flushed with anger, and her hands shook with barely contained rage. Surrounding her were several high-ranking palace officials, including the Prime Minister's representative, the Archbishop of Astoria, and, most prominently, Prince Alexander himself. Alexander stood near the throne, his handsome face pale and his blue eyes avoiding Elena's gaze entirely. He looked guilty and ashamed, but also defiant, as if he was angry at being caught rather than remorseful for his actions. Elena felt a familiar stab of pain and disappointment as she looked at the man she had once loved so deeply. "There she is," Queen Isabel hissed, her voice dripping with venom as her eyes locked onto Elena. "The ungrateful little commoner who thinks she can destroy this family's reputation with her pathetic need for attention." Elena felt the guards behind her tense at the Queen's words, but she kept her own voice steady and calm. "Your Majesty, I assume you're referring to my interview yesterday. I said nothing that wasn't true." "Truth." Queen Isabel let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the chamber. "You think your little feelings matter more than 800 years of royal tradition? You think your wounded pride is worth more than the stability of this nation?" The Queen began to pace back and forth, her fury building with each step. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The newspapers are already speculating about problems in your marriage. The opposition party is calling for investigations into the royal family's private affairs. You've opened a door that should have remained permanently sealed." Elena lifted her chin defiantly. "I opened a door that your son kicked down when he decided to betray our marriage vows. I am not the villain in this story, Your Majesty." The effect of Elena's words on Queen Isabel was immediate and explosive. The older woman's face turned an alarming shade of red, and she took several rapid steps toward Elena, her finger pointed accusingly. "How dare you?" the Queen screamed, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "How dare you stand there and lecture me about morality when you're nothing but a social climber who married my son for his title and is now trying to destroy him because he finally came to his senses?" Captain Morrison and the other guards immediately moved closer to Elena, forming a protective semicircle around her. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable, and Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward these men who were risking their careers to show their loyalty to her. Prince Alexander finally spoke up, his voice weak and uncertain. "Mother, perhaps we should calm down and discuss this rationally." "Rationally?" Queen Isabel whirled on her son, her fury now directed at him as well. "There is nothing rational about this situation. Your wife has humiliated our family in front of the entire world, and you're suggesting we have a calm discussion." Elena watched this exchange with a mixture of sadness and determination. She had known that confronting the royal family's dysfunction would be difficult, but seeing Queen Isabel's complete breakdown was more disturbing than she had expected. The woman who had always prided herself on perfect royal composure was revealing herself to be petty, cruel, and completely out of control. "Your Majesty," Elena said, her voice cutting through the Queen's tirade, "screaming at me won't change the facts. Alexander had an affair. He betrayed our marriage and humiliated me. I gave him and this family every opportunity to address the situation with dignity, but instead, you chose to attack me and protect him. I won't be silenced anymore." The queen's response was swift and vicious. She grabbed a crystal paperweight from a nearby table and hurled it toward Elena with surprising force. Captain Morrison reacted instantly, stepping between Elena and the flying object, which shattered against his armored chest. "That's enough," Morrison barked, his usual deference to the queen replaced by protective anger. "Guards, form a protective circle around Her Highness immediately." 6 guards instantly moved to surround Elena, their ceremonial swords partially drawn in a clear show of force. The sight of the royal guard preparing to defend Princess Elena against Queen Isabel sent shockwaves through the assembled officials. Several of them backed away from the confrontation, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing such a dramatic breakdown of royal protocol. Queen Isabel stared at the guards in shock and outrage. "How dare you draw weapons in my presence? I am your queen. You serve me, not this ungrateful little actress." Captain Morrison's jaw tightened, but his voice remained respectfully firm. "Your Majesty, our oath is to protect all members of the royal family from harm, including from each other if necessary. Princess Elena is in danger, and we will not allow any harm to come to her." The standoff that followed was unlike anything in the palace's long history. The Queen of Astoria, red-faced and trembling with rage, faced off against her own guards who had formed a protective barrier around the princess. Prince Alexander stood frozen, apparently unable to decide whether to support his mother or his wife. The various officials and courtiers pressed themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible witnesses to this unprecedented breakdown of royal authority. Elena stood in the center of the guard circle, her heart pounding, but her resolve strengthening with each passing moment. She had crossed a line today that could never be uncrossed. By speaking truth to power and refusing to be intimidated by Queen Isabel's fury, she had set in motion events that would forever change the Asturian monarchy. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Queen Isabel seemed to regain some measure of control over herself. She smoothed down her disheveled hair and attempted to restore some dignity to her appearance, though the damage to her composure was irreversible. "This isn't over," the queen said, her voice low and threatening. "You may have these guards fooled, but I know what you really are. You're a destroyer, Elena. You've come into this family and poisoned everything you've touched. But I won't let you destroy my son or this monarchy." Elena met the queen's glare with steady courage. "I'm not trying to destroy anything, Your Majesty. I'm trying to save what's left of my dignity and maybe, if there's any justice in the world, prevent other young women from being trapped in the same web of lies and manipulation that has defined my marriage." With that declaration, Elena turned to Captain Morrison. "Captain, I believe it would be best if I return to my chambers now. I have some important phone calls to make." As the guards escorted Elena from the throne room, she could feel Queen Isabel's burning gaze on her back. She knew that this confrontation was just the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would test her strength, her resolve, and her ability to survive in a world where tradition and power mattered more than truth and justice. But as she walked through the palace corridors surrounded by guards who had chosen to protect her rather than blindly serve the crown, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The storm had finally broken, and while the path ahead would be treacherous, at least she was no longer walking alone. The game had changed, and Elena was ready to play by new rules. The news of the throne room confrontation spread through Astoria Palace like wildfire, carried by whispered conversations between staff members and meaningful glances exchanged in corridors. By evening, the entire palace was buzzing with tension and uncertainty. Servants who had worked within these walls for decades had never witnessed such a dramatic breakdown of royal protocol, and many were beginning to question their loyalties. Princess Elena sat in her private study, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and constitutional law books that had been quietly delivered by sympathetic palace librarians. The warm light from the antique desk lamp cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the determination that had replaced the uncertainty of the morning. She was no longer the vulnerable woman who had been ambushed in the throne room. She had transformed into a strategic thinker preparing for the battle of her life. Margaret knocked softly on the door before entering with a silver tea service and an expression of barely concealed worry. "Your Highness, I brought your tea, and there are some developments you should know about." Elena looked up from the constitutional law text she had been studying. "What kind of developments, Margaret?" "Captain Morrison requested a private audience with you. He's waiting in the blue salon with several other senior guards. They seem quite concerned about something." Margaret paused, then added quietly, "Also, there have been 3 black cars with tinted windows parked outside the palace gates since this afternoon. They're not official palace vehicles." Elena felt a chill of apprehension. She had expected Queen Isabel to retaliate, but she hadn't anticipated it happening so quickly. "Did Captain Morrison say what this was about?" "No, Your Highness, but his expression suggested it was urgent and serious." Elena closed the law book and stood, smoothing down her navy blue dress. "Very well. Have him brought here instead. I want this conversation to remain as private as possible." Minutes later, Captain Morrison entered the study, followed by 3 other senior guards whom Elena recognized as men who had served the royal family faithfully for many years. Their faces were grave, and Morrison carried what appeared to be an official document in his hands. "Your Highness," Morrison began without preamble, "we need to discuss your safety and the rather unusual orders we've received this evening." Elena gestured for them to sit, though Morrison remained standing as protocol demanded. "What orders?" Morrison held up the document. "Queen Isabel has issued a royal decree restricting your movements within the palace. You're no longer permitted to leave the East Wing without express written permission from her personally. Additionally, your personal staff has been reduced, and your access to outside communication has been limited." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "She's placing me under house arrest?" "Not officially, Your Highness. The decree uses language about ensuring your safety during a difficult personal period and protecting the royal family's privacy while sensitive matters are resolved. But the practical effect is the same." One of the other guards, Sergeant William Hayes, stepped forward. "Your Highness, there's something else. We've been ordered to report all of your activities, including your conversations and any attempts to contact people outside the palace. We're supposed to intercept any mail or packages intended for you." Elena felt the walls closing in around her, but her voice remained steady. "And will you be following those orders, Sergeant Hayes?" The 4 guards exchanged meaningful looks before Morrison answered. "Your Highness, we've served this royal family for a combined total of nearly 60 years. We've sworn oaths to protect and serve, but we've also witnessed enough palace politics to recognize injustice when we see it." Hayes nodded firmly. "What happened to you in that throne room today was wrong. What Prince Alexander did to your marriage was wrong. And these new restrictions are wrong. We won't be reporting your private conversations or intercepting your communications." Elena felt a wave of gratitude and relief wash over her. You realize that by defying these orders, you're risking your careers and possibly your freedom. Morrison's weathered face showed no hesitation. "Some things are more important than careers, Your Highness. Protecting innocent people from abuse of power is one of those things." The 3rd guard, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Your Highness, there's something else you should know. The black cars outside the gates belong to a private security firm that Queen Isabel hired this afternoon. They're not here to protect you. They're here to ensure that the house arrest is enforced if we refuse to do it." Elena absorbed this information with growing alarm. Queen Isabel was moving quickly to isolate her and prevent her from continuing to speak out about Alexander's infidelity and the royal family's dysfunction. But the Queen had made a critical error in assuming that the palace guard would blindly follow orders that went against their sense of justice and honor. "Gentlemen," Elena said, making a decision that would change everything, "I need to ask something of you that goes far beyond your normal duties. I need your help not just to stay safe, but to expose the truth about what's really happening in this family." Morrison leaned forward slightly. What do you have in mind, Your Highness? Elena moved to her desk and pulled out a folder she had been preparing all afternoon. I've been gathering evidence of Alexander's affair, the palace's cover-up attempts, and now Queen Isabel's illegal restriction of my freedom. I have photographs, documents, recorded conversations, and witness statement from palace staff who have seen Alexander with Lady Victoria. She opened the folder to reveal dozens of photographs, including several that clearly showed Alexander and Lady Victoria in intimate embraces in various locations throughout the palace and its grounds. There were also copies of romantic text messages, hotel receipts, and jewelry purchase records that painted a damning picture of the heir's infidelity. My God, Hayes whispered, looking at the evidence. How long has this been going on? Over a year, Elena replied. Long before the media started speculating about problems in our marriage. But every time I tried to address it through official channels, I was told to keep quiet for the good of the monarchy. Morrison studied the photographs with professional interest. Your Highness, this evidence is explosive. If it becomes public, it will destroy the fairy tale image that the royal family has worked so hard to maintain, Elena finished. But it will also free me from a marriage built on lies and give other women the courage to speak out when they're being mistreated. Lieutenant Webb looked troubled. Your Highness, with respect, releasing this information could destabilize the entire monarchy. Are you prepared for those consequences? Elena met his gaze directly. Lieutenant, I've spent the last 6 months watching my husband flaunt his mistress in front of me while his mother and the palace advisors told me to smile and pretend everything was perfect. I've been humiliated, isolated, and now essentially imprisoned for having the audacity to suggest that I deserve basic human dignity. The monarchy that requires such sacrifices from innocent people doesn't deserve to survive unchanged. The room fell silent as the guards processed the full implications of what Elena was proposing. She wasn't just planning to divorce Alexander or leave the royal family quietly. She was preparing to wage open war against the institution itself. Morrison was the first to speak. What do you need from us, Your Highness? I need you to help me get this evidence to journalists who will publish it fairly and accurately. I also need protection while the story breaks, because Queen Isabel's reaction to today's confrontation will seem mild compared to what's coming. Hayes frowned thoughtfully. Getting information out of the palace won't be easy, especially with those security teams outside. But it's not impossible if we're careful. There's another complication, Webb added. Prince Alexander has requested a meeting with you tomorrow morning. He claims he wants to apologize and discuss reconciliation. Elena laughed bitterly. After everything that's happened today, he thinks he can charm his way back into my good graces? What did you tell him? Morrison's expression was grim. We told him we'd relay the message. But, Your Highness, I suspect this meeting isn't really about reconciliation. Given the timing and the new restrictions on your movement, I believe it's a trap. What kind of trap? They're probably hoping you'll say something that can be used against you in divorce proceedings or custody battles. Or worse, they might try to get you to sign some kind of agreement that would prevent you from speaking publicly about Alexander's affair. Elena had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by Morrison made her realize how carefully orchestrated Queen Isabel's response had been. The house arrest, the private security, the sudden meeting request from Alexander. It was all part of a strategy to isolate her and force her into submission. Then, we'll turn their trap against them, Elena said, her voice filled with quiet determination. I'll take that meeting with Alexander, but I'll be recording every word. If he tries to manipulate me or make threats, the world will hear exactly what kind of man the future king really is. Margaret, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room, suddenly spoke up. Your Highness, there's something else you should know. Lady Victoria has been staying in the North Wing for the past 3 days. She's been attending private dinners with Alexander and Queen Isabel. The guards looked shocked by this revelation, but Elena felt only a cold sense of vindication. So while they're restricting my movements and treating me like a prisoner, they're welcoming Alexander's mistress as an honored guest. How perfectly appropriate. Morrison's jaw tightened with anger. That's unconscionable. Even by the standards of royal marital problems, this is beyond acceptable behavior. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens where she had once walked happily with Alexander during the early days of their marriage. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, a naive young woman who had believed in fairy tale endings and honorable princes. "Gentlemen," she said without turning around, "tomorrow will be a day that changes everything. By tomorrow evening, the world will know the truth about Prince Alexander, Queen Isabel, and the rot that has infected this royal family. Are you prepared to stand with me when that happens?" The four guards stood and came to attention in a show of solidarity that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. "We stand with you, Your Highness," Morrison said firmly. "Whatever the consequences." As the guards filed out of the study to begin planning their next moves, Elena remained at the window, watching the shadows lengthen across the palace grounds. Tomorrow's confrontation with Alexander would be the final test of her resolve, and she intended to pass it with flying colors. The game of royal politics was about to change forever, and Elena was ready to show the world what happened when they underestimated a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Outside in the darkness, the black security vehicles maintained their vigil, unaware that inside the palace walls, a revolution was quietly taking shape. Dawn broke over Astoria Palace with an ominous red sky that the palace staff whispered was an omen of the chaos to come. Princess Elena had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing her evidence and preparing for what she knew would be the most important conversation of her life. The meeting with Prince Alexander was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning room, a relatively intimate space that the royal family typically used for private discussions. Elena chose her outfit carefully, a crisp white blouse and black blazer that conveyed both professionalism and strength. She wanted to look like someone who meant business, not a victim pleading for sympathy. Hidden beneath her blazer was a small digital recording device that Captain Morrison had provided, along with strict instructions on how to activate it without detection. As she made her way through the palace corridors, Elena noticed the increased security presence. Queen Isabel's hired guards were now stationed at key positions throughout the building, their presence a stark reminder of how dramatically the situation had escalated. However, she also noticed something encouraging. Many of the regular palace staff made eye contact with her and offered small nods of support. Word of yesterday's confrontation had spread, and it appeared that public opinion within the palace was beginning to shift in her favor. Margaret met her outside the morning room with last-minute intelligence. "Your Highness, Prince Alexander isn't alone. Lord Chancellor Hopkins and the palace's chief legal advisor are both with him, along with Lady Victoria." Elena felt a surge of anger at the mention of Alexander's mistress, but she kept her expression composed. "Lady Victoria is attending a meeting about reconciling my marriage? How thoughtful of her." "There's more, Your Highness. They prepared some documents for you to sign. I couldn't see what they contained, but Lord Chancellor Hopkins looked very pleased with himself when he arrived." Elena activated the recording device and squared her shoulders. "Well then, let's not keep them waiting. I'm quite interested to see what they think I'm going to agree to." She entered the morning room to find exactly the scene Margaret had described. Alexander sat at the head of the polished oak table, looking uncomfortable but defiant. To his right sat Lord Chancellor Hopkins, a thin, calculating man who had never liked Elena and made no effort to hide his disdain for her common background. The palace legal advisor, Mr. Cromwell, sat to Alexander's left with a stack of official-looking documents. And there, sitting beside Hopkins as if she belonged at this family meeting, was Lady Victoria Pemberton. She was a striking woman with auburn hair and the kind of aristocratic features that graced the pages of society magazines. Victoria had the grace not to look directly at Elena, but her presence alone was a deliberate insult that made the true purpose of this meeting crystal clear. "Elena," Alexander began, attempting his most charming smile, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I know yesterday was difficult for everyone involved." Elena took the seat directly across from her husband, noting how the seating arrangement had been designed to make her feel outnumbered and isolated. Alexander. Gentlemen. Lady Victoria. She gave the other woman a cold nod. I must say, this is an interesting group for a marriage counseling session. Hopkins cleared his throat officiously. Your Highness, we've gathered today to discuss a solution that would benefit everyone involved, particularly in light of yesterday's unfortunate outburst. You mean Queen Isabel's complete mental breakdown and subsequent attempt to assault me with a crystal paperweight? Elena replied sweetly. Yes, that was quite unfortunate. Alexander shifted uncomfortably. Elena, please. We're here to find a way forward that preserves everyone's dignity. Elena looked directly at Lady Victoria. Everyone's dignity? How fascinating. I wasn't aware that mistresses were typically concerned with the dignity of the wives they've betrayed. Victoria finally met Elena's gaze, her expression a mixture of defiance and guilt. Your Highness, I never intended for things to happen this way. Alexander and our connection was unexpected. Your connection, Elena repeated slowly, lasted over a year and included romantic getaways to 3 different countries, jewelry worth approximately £50,000, and intimate encounters in 17 different locations within this palace. That's quite an unexpected connection. The specificity of Elena's knowledge clearly shocked everyone in the room. Alexander went pale, Hopkins frowned deeply, and Victoria looked like she might be sick. How did you? Alexander started to ask, then seemed to realize the implications of finishing that question. How did I know? Elena smiled coldly. Because unlike everyone else in this family, I actually pay attention to what's happening around me. I have photographs, receipts, text messages, and witness statements documenting your entire affair. Did you really think you could conduct a secret relationship in a building filled with security cameras and staff members who notice everything? Hopkins quickly regained his composure and pushed the documents across the table toward Elena. Your Highness, perhaps we should focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. We've prepared an agreement that we believe addresses everyone's concerns. Elena glanced at the papers without picking them up. And what does this agreement propose? Cromwell, the legal advisor, took over the explanation. The document outlines a trial separation period during which you would maintain your royal duties and public appearances while living separately from Prince Alexander. In exchange, you would agree to refrain from making any public statements about private family matters. In other words, Elena translated, I would continue to play the role of the perfect princess while Alexander continues his affair, and I would be legally prevented from telling the truth about any of it. We prefer to think of it as maintaining stability during a difficult transitional period, Hopkins said smoothly. Elena finally picked up the agreement and began reading through it carefully. The terms were even worse than she had expected. In addition to the gag order, the document would have given Alexander primary custody of any future children, restricted Elena's access to royal properties, and included a clause that would strip her of her title and financial support if she violated any aspect of the agreement. This is remarkable, Elena said, continuing to read. According to this document, if I ever speak publicly about Alexander's infidelity, I lose everything and become persona non grata. But there's no corresponding clause restricting his behavior. He's free to continue his relationship with Lady Victoria, conduct future affairs, or even marry someone else while I'm legally bound to silence and good behavior. Alexander finally found his voice. Elena, I know this seems harsh, but we have to think about the bigger picture. The monarchy needs stability. The people need to believe in the royal family. Elena set the document down and looked directly at her husband. The people deserve the truth, Alexander. They deserve to know that the man who will someday be their king is a liar and a cheat who breaks his most sacred promises. That's enough. Hopkins snapped, his diplomatic facade finally cracking. Your Highness, you seem to be under the impression that you have some kind of leverage in this situation. Let me be clear. You have none. If you refuse to sign this agreement, we will make your life so difficult that you'll beg for the chance to disappear quietly. Elena felt a moment of fear at the implied threat, but then she remembered the guards who had pledged their loyalty to her, and the evidence she had carefully compiled. "Are you threatening me, Lord Chancellor?" "I'm explaining reality to you," Hopkins replied coldly. "You're a commoner who married into this family. You could be removed from it just as easily." It was at that moment that Elena realized the meeting was never about reconciliation or even negotiating a reasonable separation. It was about intimidation and control. They had brought Lady Victoria to humiliate her, prepared a one-sided legal document to trap her, and were now resorting to threats when she refused to comply. "You know what I find most interesting about this entire situation?" Elena said, her voice remaining calm despite her growing anger. "None of you have expressed any remorse for what Alexander did. None of you have acknowledged that betraying marriage vows is wrong. Your only concern is managing the scandal and silencing the victim." Lady Victoria suddenly spoke up, her voice defensive. "You make it sound so calculated and cruel. Alexander and I fell in love. These things happen in marriages that aren't working." Elena turned her full attention to the other woman. "My marriage was working fine until you decided to seduce my husband. And now you're sitting here in my family's palace, acting like a victim in a story where you're actually the villain. That's not fair," Victoria protested. "You don't understand the pressure Alexander was under, the expectations, the loneliness of royal life." "The loneliness?" Elena's voice rose slightly. "I lived the same royal life he did. I faced the same pressures and expectations. The difference is that I honor my marriage vows while he was sneaking around with you in supply closets and guest bedrooms." Alexander finally showed some emotion, though it was anger rather than remorse. "Elena, you're being unnecessarily cruel to Victoria. She's not the enemy here." Elena stared at her husband in disbelief. "She's not the enemy? Alexander, she's been sleeping with my husband for over a year. In what universe is she not the enemy?" "In the universe where your marriage was already failing," Alexander shot back. "You want to blame Victoria and me for something that was inevitable. We grew apart, Elena. We became different people. What Victoria and I have is real love, not some arranged partnership for the sake of appearances." The casual cruelty of Alexander's words hit Elena like a slap across the face. He was rewriting their entire relationship history to justify his betrayal, making their marriage sound like a business arrangement rather than the genuine love affair it had been in the beginning. "Real love," Elena repeated quietly. "Is that what you call sneaking around behind your wife's back and lying to everyone who trusted you? Is that what real love looks like, Alexander?" Hopkins sensed that the conversation was spiraling out of control and intervened. "Your Highness, these emotional discussions aren't productive. The simple fact is that this agreement represents your best option for maintaining some dignity and financial security as this situation resolves itself." Elena looked around the table at these four people who were expecting her to sign away her voice, her truth, and her future for the sake of their convenience. The recording device continued to capture every word, every insult, and every threat they made. "You're right, Lord Chancellor," Elena said, standing up from her chair. "This conversation isn't productive, but it has been extremely enlightening." She picked up the agreement and, to everyone's shock, tore it in half. "I will not be signing your document. I will not be silenced. And I will not pretend that any of this is acceptable." Alexander jumped to his feet. "Elena, think about what you're doing. If you make this public, you'll destroy everything." Elena met his gaze one final time, seeing clearly the weak, selfish man she had somehow missed during 3 years of marriage. "Alexander," she said with quiet dignity, "you destroyed everything the moment you decided that your desires mattered more than your promises. I'm simply refusing to help you cover up the wreckage." As she walked toward the door, Victoria called out desperately, "Your Highness, please. Think about the damage this will cause." Elena paused at the doorway and turned back to face the room. "Lady Victoria," she said, "I've thought about very little else for the past 6 months. But I've finally realized that sometimes things need to be destroyed before they can be rebuilt properly. This royal family has become corrupt, dishonest, and cruel. Perhaps a little destruction is exactly what we need." With that declaration, Princess Elena walked out of the morning room and into a future that would be uncertain but honest. Behind her, the four conspirators sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand that they had gravely underestimated the woman they had tried to break. The hours following Elena's dramatic exit from the morning room moved with the swift inevitability of an avalanche. Within 30 minutes of the failed meeting, Captain Morrison and his loyal guards had implemented their carefully planned operation to smuggle Elena's explosive evidence out of the palace. Using a network of trusted staff members and service tunnels that most of the royal family didn't even know existed, they managed to deliver copies of the photographs, documents, and recorded conversations to 3 different journalists simultaneously. Elena herself remained in her chambers, ostensibly under Queen Isabel's house arrest, but in reality coordinating the media strategy with the help of her secretly installed communication devices. She had chosen her journalists carefully, one from a respected national newspaper known for thorough investigation, another from an international publication with royal family expertise, and a third from a television news program that specialized in documentary-style exposés. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all 3 media outlets had confirmed the authenticity of the evidence and were preparing to release their stories simultaneously at 6 o'clock that evening. Elena had insisted on this coordinated approach to prevent any single outlet from being pressured or intimidated into suppressing the story. The first sign that something had gone wrong with the royal family's damage control efforts came when Queen Isabel burst into Elena's chambers without announcement, accompanied by 6 guards that Elena didn't recognize. These men wore the uniforms of the private security company, not the regular palace guard, and their expressions suggested they were prepared for violence if necessary. "You stupid, vindictive little girl," the queen screamed, her face purple with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Elena remained seated at her writing desk, projecting an image of calm control despite the thundering of her heart. "I assume you're referring to my decision not to sign your ridiculous agreement this morning?" Queen Isabel slammed a tablet down on the desk, showing the breaking news alerts that were already appearing on social media. The palace scandal that shook the crown, royal marriage in crisis, evidence of prince's year-long affair, Princess Elena breaks her silence, the truth behind palace walls. "How did you get this information to the press?" the queen demanded. "We've been monitoring all of your communications." Elena smiled serenely. "Your Majesty, you've been monitoring the communications that you knew about. Did you really think I would conduct this operation using palace phones and email accounts that you control?" The queen's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Where are the original documents? The photographs? The recordings?" "Safe," Elena replied simply. "And if anything happens to me, there are instructions for even more damaging information to be released automatically." This was actually a bluff. Elena had no additional information beyond what she had already provided to the journalists, but the queen's reaction suggested that the threat was being taken seriously. Queen Isabel began pacing around the room like a caged animal, her usual royal composure completely abandoned. "You don't understand what you've done. This will destroy the monarchy. Centuries of tradition, gone because of your petty revenge. This will reform the monarchy," Elena corrected. "The people deserve to know who they're being asked to respect and support with their tax money. They deserve leaders who actually live by the values they preach." One of the private security guards stepped forward menacingly. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider more direct methods of resolving this situation." The implied threat in his words sent a chill through Elena's blood, but before anyone could respond, the chamber doors burst open and Captain Morrison entered with a full squad of the regular palace guard, all with weapons drawn. "Stand down." Morrison commanded the private security team. "You have no authority to threaten members of the royal family." The confrontation that followed was unlike anything in the palace's 800-year history. 2 different security forces faced off in a royal chamber, each claiming authority and legitimacy. Queen Isabel stood between them, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her as she realized that her own guards were rebelling against her commands. "Captain Morrison," the queen said, her voice dripping with venom, "you are relieved of your duties immediately." "These men answered me now." Morrison didn't move. "Your Majesty," Our oath is to protect the royal family from all threats, including internal ones. We cannot and will not allow Princess Elena to be harmed or intimidated, regardless of who gives the orders. The leader of the private security team reached for his weapon, but found himself staring down the barrels of 6 ceremonial swords that could still cut through flesh as effectively as they had centuries ago. I would reconsider that decision, Sergeant Hayes said quietly, his blade steady and sure. Elena watched this standoff with a mixture of fear and amazement. These men were risking everything to protect her, defying direct orders from the Queen herself. Their loyalty and courage in the face of such pressure was both humbling and inspiring. The tension was broken by the arrival of another unexpected player in this royal drama. Prince Alexander appeared in the doorway, looking haggard and desperate. Behind him trailed Lady Victoria, who appeared to have been crying. "Mother, what's happening here?" Alexander demanded, taking in a scene of drawn weapons and hostile guards. Queen Isabel whirled on her son, with fury equal to what she had directed at Elena. "What's happening is that your pathetic inability to control your wife has destroyed our family. The story is already spreading across the internet. Within hours, everyone in the world will know about your affair." Alexander's face went ashen as the full implications hit him. But we can deny it. We can claim the evidence is fabricated." Elena finally spoke up from her position behind the protective line of guards. "Alexander, I have recordings of you and Victoria discussing intimate details of your relationship. I have photographs of you together in compromising positions. I have receipts for jewelry you bought her and hotels you stayed at together. What exactly are you planning to deny?" Lady Victoria stepped forward, her earlier defiance replaced by desperate pleading. "Princess Elena, please. If this story breaks, it will destroy my reputation, my family's name, my future. I made a mistake, but I don't deserve to have my entire life ruined." Elena looked at the woman who had helped destroy her marriage and felt not anger, but a surprising sense of pity. "Lady Victoria, you made choices. You chose to pursue a married man. You chose to conduct an affair in his family's home. You chose to participate in a plan to intimidate me into silence. These are the consequences of those choices." Prince Alexander suddenly seemed to realize the full scope of what Elena had been doing. "Elena, you've been planning this for months, haven't you? The legal research, gathering evidence, building alliances with the guards, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision." "No, Alexander, it wasn't. I gave you and your family multiple opportunities to address this situation with dignity and honesty. Every time, you chose deception and manipulation instead. You forced me to take drastic measures." Queen Isabel had been listening to this exchange with growing horror as she realized the sophistication of Elena's operation. "You calculated little snake. You've been manipulating all of us, pretending to be the victim while you plotted our destruction." Elena stood up for the first time since the confrontation began, her guards adjusting their positions to maintain their protective formation around her. "Your Majesty, I'm the victim in this story. But that doesn't mean I have to remain helpless. You taught me that in royal politics, you either fight back or you get destroyed. I chose to fight back." At that moment, Margaret burst into the room with news that changed everything. "Your Highness, the first news report just went live. It's on every major news channel and website." Elena felt a surge of triumph mixed with terror. The point of no return had finally been reached. Within minutes, the entire world would know the truth about Prince Alexander's infidelity and the royal family's attempts to cover it up. Queen Isabel grabbed the tablet and began frantically scrolling through the news coverage. Her face went from red to pale to green as she read the headlines and saw the photographs that Elena had secretly gathered over months of careful investigation. "This is a catastrophe," she whispered. "The opposition parties will demand investigations. The Archbishop will question Alexander's fitness to be king. Foreign governments will lose respect for us. The damage is incalculable." Alexander slumped into a chair, apparently unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. "Elena, is there any way to stop this? Any way to contain the damage?" Elena looked at her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, with something approaching sympathy. Alexander, the time for damage control was a year ago when you chose to start an affair instead of working on our marriage. Or 6 months ago when I first confronted you about Victoria. Or even yesterday when you could have confessed publicly and asked for forgiveness. But instead, you chose to attack me, restrict my freedom, and try to force me into silence. The damage you're worried about is damage that you caused. The sound of helicopters overhead indicated that the media circus was beginning in earnest. News crews were undoubtedly gathering outside the palace gates. Royal correspondents were being rushed into television studios, and social media was exploding with reactions to the scandal. Captain Morrison received a communication through his radio and turned to address the room. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister is requesting an emergency meeting. The Archbishop of Astoria is also asking for an immediate audience. And there are approximately 50 journalists at the palace gates requesting statements. Queen Isabel looked around the room at the wreckage of her carefully maintained royal facade. Her son sat slumped in defeat. His mistress wept quietly in the corner. The palace guards had openly rebelled against her authority, and the daughter-in-law she had tried to silence had outmaneuvered her at every turn. You've won, she said quietly to Elena. I hope you're satisfied with what you've accomplished. Elena met the Queen's gaze without flinching. Your Majesty, I haven't won anything. I've simply refused to lose my dignity and my voice. The royal family can survive this scandal, but only if it learns to value honesty over image management and justice over convenience. The Queen turned and walked toward the door, her private security team following uncertainly behind her. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at Elena one last time. You may have destroyed the monarchy as we know it, but you've also destroyed yourself in the process. No one will ever trust you again. You'll be seen as the woman who brought down the crown. Elena smiled sadly. Perhaps, but I'll also be seen as the woman who refused to be silenced when powerful people tried to cover up their crimes. I'll be remembered as someone who chose truth over comfort. I can live with that legacy. As Queen Isabel and her entourage left the chamber, Elena found herself alone with the guards who had protected her and Margaret, who had supported her throughout this ordeal. The immediate crisis had passed, but she knew that the real battle was just beginning. Outside, the helicopters continued their circular flights around the palace, and the world's media prepared to dissect every aspect of the scandal that Princess Elena had courageously brought to light. The story would dominate headlines for weeks, spark debates about the relevance of monarchy in the modern world, and inspire other women to speak out against powerful men who had mistreated them. Elena walked to the window and looked out at the gathered crowds. Some held signs supporting her, others condemned her actions, but all were engaged in a conversation that had been desperately needed. The fairy tale of the perfect royal family was over, but in its place might emerge something more honest, more human, and ultimately more worthy of the people's respect. The storm had passed, the truth was finally free, and Princess Elena had emerged not as a victim, but as a woman who had found the courage to fight for justice against impossible odds. The monarchy would survive, but it would never be the same again. And perhaps, Elena thought as she watched the crowd below, that was exactly what the world needed.